In this video, we are going to talk about SQL constraints. So constraints are basically rules used to enforce business rules and practices and other policies. So it is going to ensure data accuracy and integrity in a way that a row cannot be inserted if it violates any constraints that we have set in our tables. So the constraints that we will cover is the primary key constraint, which will determine that the column is going to be unique. So this is going to be a unique identifier for every column. This cannot be null. By default, it's going to be unique and it's going to be required. Now the foreign key constraint is basically what's going to represent the relationship between two entities. So some of the cases are one-to-many or a one-to-one relationship. We will also explore the unique constraint, which will ensure that all data values in that specific column are unique, but this is not the primary key. The difference between unique and primary key is that unique will allow null. We will also include the check constraint, which will ensure that the values are correct before entering those values. So for example, if we're talking about ship date and order date, we want to make sure that the ship date is on or after the order date. It cannot be before the order date. This is one example of check a constraint. And finally, the not null constraint, which will enforce the fact that this attribute is going to be required. Now, when will we create constraints? So we have two options, either during table creation or when we have an existing table, we can use the alter table command to add those constraints to the table. Now the constraints can be applied on a column level or also on a table level. Let's start by talking about the primary key constraint. So for the primary key constraint, it's going to ensure that columns do not include duplicates or null values. It can be added to the table during creation using the constraint keyword or by just saying primary key right after the column that you want. Or it can also be added to an existing table using the add constraint command. So let's see an example on that. So recall this data set that we've been working with. If I want to copy the computer books into a table, so let me start by describing the books table. Okay. So now if I look here, it says ISBN is the primary key and publisher ID is the foreign key. Now let me go ahead and create table, and let me call this computer underscore books. And this is going to be nothing but the value, what we get from the select query when we say select everything from books where the category is equal to computer. So if I create this table and then I refresh, I got the computer books table. Now let me describe the computer books. Okay. As you can see, the not null constraint got copied, but I don't have any key constraints. So what I want to do is I want to add that constraint into my table. What I can do is I can come here and say alter table, and then I'll provide the table name, which is computer books, and I will say add constraint, and the constraint I want to add is a primary key, but I will give it a name. So for my case, I'll say comp underscore books underscore ISBN underscore BK. Now this is just a name, you can use whatever name you want. And then I will say this constraint is a primary key, and the column that I need to be my primary key is ISBN. Okay. And let me follow it by the described books. I'll leave it there just to see what happens. Now if you look here, I got this as my primary key. So I was able to basically add the primary key to my table. I can include two columns, and it is going to basically have it as a combined primary key as well. But if I want to include two columns, it has to be separated by comma. Now if I try to do this right now and say title and try to run it, it's going to give me an error here. It says multiple primary key defined. The reason is, as we have seen before, a table cannot have more than one primary key. So if we fall into this case, what we'll need to do is basically we will need to take out this primary key and then adding another primary key, and we will see later on how we can just take out the primary key out. We'll see later on how we can take out all of the constraints out of the table.